listen. Western Australia is not in a resources boom, but... Okay, what we do have is we do have one big project into construction, Gorgon, and we have several other nearly as large projects at various stages of planning and final approval. I expect they will go ahead. So we do face over this decade probably maybe even an unprecedented period of investment and construction across petroleum and the mining industry. That's the reality. Yeah. Now, whatever you might think of me, whatever you might think of this government, whatever you might think, can I just put it to you? The first job is to get these projects actually happening. That is not easy. That is not easy. Can I remind you of a couple of things? Can I remind you of a couple? These projects do not just walk in the door. They don't. And if I can tell you about that, if you just look at the recent history, Gorgon had stalled. It took a huge effort to get it underway. Impex went to Darwin. Oakajee is probably the most difficult and complex project I've ever worked on. All I say is my job as Premier is the first job is to get the projects to happen. The second job, just as important, if not more important, is to make sure this state benefits from those projects. Okay? Who are way down on their capacity. That's the reality. Okay. So,
you signed off on that. It's being manufactured overseas now.
Train 2 Pluto was signed off by Labor. It's the reality. So, look, let me go on. So the steel fabrication industry is, and I know there are engineers and others here, but I just want to talk about steel fabrication because the issue was raised in Parliament. It's been raised by unions and other groups, and you are right. You raise a legitimate, real issue. So I'll tell you what I've done. I've done what this government is doing. In February, well, please listen. I know a lot of you are trying to listen, so I think that you deserve a chance to hear what I have to say, whether you agree or not. Now, the first thing we did after people sort of came back over after Christmas, I went down and I went with the Minister for Commerce. We did a tour of the major steel fabricators, and we went through them, and two things struck me. First, they had made major investments in the latest technology and equipment. That was obvious. They had spent millions, perhaps even tens of millions of dollars on that. It was also obvious that on average across those fabrication yards, they were probably working at about a third of their capacity, some not even at that. That was very obvious, and so I agree with you on that. After that meeting, that was I think the 8th of February, 2 days later I called into my office, first the major petroleum companies in this state, then I met with the major mining companies, then I met with the major lead contractors, and I went through the issues point by point with them and asked for their comments, their explanations. In Australia, mate, right here, okay?
How many jobs you signed away?
Just wait a minute. Okay, I want to keep going. So that is what's done. Then about a week after that, maybe 2 weeks after that, I think something that's probably never happened in Western Australia before. On a Saturday morning, do you want to listen or not? I mean, are you real about this issue or not? Okay, on a Saturday morning, with the head of Woodside, the head of Chevron, the head of BHP and the head of Rio Tinto, we went down on a Saturday morning and did the same thing. Went through the workshops, talked to the management, talked to some of the workers in there. Yep, and I've talked to the unions, happy to do that. And met with the Steel Institute as well. So we went through there and a number of things came out. First, the CEOs of those companies acknowledged that the sophistication of that fabrication and their skills levels were outstanding, and they weren't conscious of that, probably to everyone's fault. Second thing that they realised, and we discussed, that when they had awarded contracts to Australian firms, the understanding of the companies was that work, all of it was being done in Australia. What they found out, to their surprise, what I found out, you need to listen to this. You need to listen to this, because some of the lead contractors who were getting work under the preference clause, under the local content clause, as Australian companies, were then sending the work offshore, and that's the issue. So that's the reality. That's what's happening. So the companies are now doing an audit of their contracts to make sure that when they give a contract for Australian work, West Australian work, it is done in Western Australia. That's what needs to happen, and that's what is happening. So that is what's happening. Now, you raised, I don't know if you want me to answer you raised 4 questions or 5 questions in your advertisement. Do you want an answer? Do you want to comment on those or not? I mean, I'm happy to do that. You want it? Okay. I think your questions were good questions, and that they deserve an answer. First one, I've got to just go back to the list. The first one, the comment was made that this government, with respect to Oakajee, had signed an agreement which sent all the work offshore. That is incorrect. It's not true. It's not a state agreement, it's a development agreement. What it does is to encourage Chinese participation in the project. It does. Okay, and I'll tell you why. It encourages Chinese participation primarily as a participant in Oakajee Port and Rail, because all of the iron ore production is headed for Chinese steel mills. Unless I can get some Chinese participation in Oakajee Port and Rail, there may not be a project. That's my first job. Otherwise there won't be any work for anyone. And I remind you, we lost IMPEX to Darwin because you had a government a few years ago that wouldn't act on getting the jobs here. Second question you made. Second question related to reports on local content. In other words, how much of a project is being done here? And I agree. And I've made a commitment that we will make public a report within the next few weeks on local content on the current project. So I assure you, I have absolutely nothing to hide, and we are going through and auditing and checking those numbers. I have nothing to hide. I want the figures out there publicly, good or bad. So I've undertaken third question was that I said that the workshops would fill up with these projects. I still believe they will. They will. And I tell you, and I think I'll give you, okay, someone wants a reason, I'll give you 2 reasons. One, at the time this government was elected, we had the global financial crisis. Now, that may seem some time ago, but what that did was put every proposal on ice for nearly 2 years. Most projects are either at the earliest stage of construction or haven't yet committed to even starting construction. Even Gorgon is at the civil engineering earthworks stage, building accommodation camps and the like. So the work that will come naturally is probably 6 to 8 months away, but already on my second visit to the workshops, it was very obvious that they had more work than they had just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Still low levels, but the work is coming. The second thing, and that's the work that I've been doing the last month with the companies and with the fabricators. The companies have committed to break up some of those big jobs into smaller components so that fabricators here can compete and get the work. So that's what's going to happen. So you will see. I mean, you will see work increase progressively into the workshops. Third one. There was talk about the proposal we should go down the Canadian path of basically mandating local content. I know that's got a sort of an instant appeal. Can I just warn you against advocating going down that path? Because remember, remember, these are contracts between private companies, most of them overseas, and local companies. You don't need the government in the middle of that. And if you look at the figures from Newfoundland are probably slightly better in offshore construction, but significantly worse than Western Australia in onshore construction. But I do agree with you, government needs to play a stronger role, and we will do that as I believe I'm doing right now. The final point relates to the role of particularly workshops, but other industries, in the training and employment of apprentices and tradesmen. And I agree that the workshops are the traditional training ground for skills, and they maintain skills. The industry, and I've been stressing this to both mining and petroleum, you need a strong engineering construction sector with all those skills for no other reason than the ongoing maintenance of the projects and their expansions which will inevitably come. That is accepted by the industry. Now, I know you're not going to agree, but I do thank you. I do thank you for the courtesy of at least listening to what I had to say. And I assure you, I agree with you. I don't agree on some of your solutions, but I agree with you with the problem, and that I and this government have a responsibility to do all that we can to increase local content for West Australian firms and for West Australian jobs. Thank you.